What do you do when things feel out of control? One of my favorite ways to experience winter is on a ski slope in Colorado. The crisp, refreshing air, the beauty of snow-covered Rocky Mountains, and the thrill of throwing your body down a mountain on two skinny boards strapped to your feet. Of course, a leisurely ski through a tree-dotted trail is nice too, but to be honest, I'm also there for the adrenaline, for the races, and to see just how fast I can ski without wiping out. But there's this sweet spot I found. When your skis start to really bounce from the speed and you start to feel like you might actually be flying instead of gliding on the snow, when you're just on the edge of out of control. I really love that feeling. But there's a tipping point. When things go from the thrill of being on the edge to wildly out of control. When I go from experiencing pure joy to pure terror. And it can happen in an instant. An icy patch or a rock sticking through the snow, or just another skier that you didn't see suddenly entering your path. One moment, everything is good. And the next, you realize this might not end well. When you're looking danger in the face, and when fun gives way to fear, what do? How do you handle the things that scare you? In Matthew 8, we find Jesus on a boat with his disciples, crossing the Sea of Galilee. Jesus had been traveling around, talking to people about the kingdom of God, and he'd been healing people who were sick. He'd drawn quite the crowd because of this, so he and his disciples, they got onto a boat to cross the sea. And Jesus, he did what my sister did on every family road trip ever. He laid down and just takes a nap. They're in the middle of the sea, and without warning, this furious storm comes up, and waves start rocking the boat and sweeping over it. And so the disciples, they went to Jesus, and they woke him up saying, "Lord, save us. We're going to drown." Can you imagine this scene? See, 1 minute, they're sailing across the sea and enjoying like downtime, right? After all of this busyness with all of these people, all of these crowds. And the next, they're caught in a storm that had them fearing for their lives. Now, some of you might be thinking, yes, this is a perfect example of why you should never get on a boat in the first place. But to be honest, that's probably not the case for most of these guys. See, boats weren't an unusual form of transportation. And in fact, we know that at least 4 of the disciples were fishermen by trade. Kind of like those of us who've grown up in Tornado Alley, they probably had a considerable amount of training and experience on how to ride out storms on the sea. But this one, it was bad. The Bible doesn't specify, but I can imagine that by the time they woke Jesus up, they had tried everything they knew how to do, and nothing was working. This was beyond their control. So they turned to Jesus. "Save us. We're going to drown." And Jesus, he asked them a question. "You have little faith. Why are you so afraid?" Then he got up, rebuked the wind and the waves, and it was completely calm. The disciples? Well, the text tells us that they were amazed. 1 second, they thought they were going down, and the next, it was still. Their response was awe and wonder. What kind of man is this? Even the wind and the waves obey him. When we read this account, I think it's pretty easy to read Jesus' question with a bit of a harsh tone, to see it as a question born out of their failure, and thus to look at the story to see what the disciples did wrong. At least that's my initial response. What did they do wrong, and how can I learn from their failure? But why did Jesus ask the question? Why does Jesus ask any question? I mean, he already knows all the answers, right? Well, over and over, we see Jesus using questions to open the door, to invite people into the conversation, into deeper understanding of his kingdom, into knowing him more. You have little faith. Why are you so afraid? When we read the question as an invitation, it's easier to hear it spoken with the kindness and compassion that Jesus had for his disciples, rather than the rebuke that the text says that he used for the storm itself. Their fear revealed their lack of faith, but Jesus' question turned it into an open door. Jesus isn't just calling them out, he's inviting them into more. He's inviting them to know him more, to see his power and authority to command the wind and the waves. They had heard him deliver powerful teaching, and they'd even seen him perform miracles and healings, but now they're seeing with their own eyes his power over nature itself. He's also inviting them into deeper faith. When we read the question as an invitation rather than a condemnation, their lack of faith can be seen as a current state, not a permanent reality. Their faith has room to grow, and that's what Jesus wants for them, for their faith to continue to grow as they understand who he is more clearly. So what about us? While you might not find yourself regularly on a boat, the reality is that life brings storms, a few literal and a lot of metaphorical ones our way. The loss of a job, the unexpected diagnosis, the relationship that feels broken beyond repair, the uncertainty of the future. Whether there's one huge wave or an unending cycle of smaller ones, we all face circumstances that bring fear, that feel beyond our control. So what do you do when the storms of life rise up against you, when you cross that threshold from fun into fear, when you feel out of control? What if the storms of life and the situations that justifiably scare us are also an invitation for us? An invitation to know Jesus more, to see our own limitations, our frailty, our deep need for him. God is always at work in our lives, providing and protecting and caring for us, but so often we miss it, and we fail to see what God is up to. But when circumstances feel beyond our control, often we are paying more attention. We might dig into the word more, and we might have more conversations with fellow believers and hear their stories of God's faithfulness. We might just have eyes to see and understand, to experience God's work in our lives firsthand. See, the storms of life are frightening and difficult, but they are also this invitation to know more personally who Jesus is. And as we grow in our understanding of who Jesus is, he's also inviting us into that deeper faith. Hebrews 11:1 tells us that faith is confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see. When we are afraid, the last thing we would say we are is confident or sure. But those moments that bring fear also are invitations to grow our faith. Because as we come to know who Jesus is and to see him at work in our circumstances and in the lives of those around us, our knowledge of him increases our confidence in what he can do. Our understanding of his character, his faithfulness, and his love, it deepens our assurance. So while fear may reveal our lack of faith, it's also an invitation to more faith, more confidence in who Jesus is, and more confidence in our ability to trust him. When Jesus invited people to follow him, he told them they would experience hardships, that trials and difficulties were not just a possibility, but a guarantee of life following him. It's a promise. But he also promised his presence. The same promises are true for us as followers. Life is messy and hard and sometimes out of control, but Jesus has promised to be with us, and his invitation to follow him is an invitation to grow deeper and deeper in relationship and trust of him.